Remember that there are no refunds. When you get to the end of your life, don't shake your fist and say, brakes optional!
There we go.
Brakes optional!
Yeah!
Wow.
All right.
All right.
Should we start? Brakes optional!
Welcome to another exciting installment of the Brakes Optional Show, where we talk about the things that we talk about.
And how. I'll go first this time, because I don't need to go first. I had a topic that I was going to cover up until about half an hour ago, and as I was reviewing my material, I stumbled upon other material, and it's way cooler, and so...
Nice. I'm excited.
So this goes back to... how old were you, David, when you started making biodiesel to run in your truck?
Oh, I was probably about 30.
Yeah, you're a slacker. There's a kid that was making biodiesel when he was 9.
Nice.
And he was hoping that his dad would run them in his fleet of soda delivery trucks.
Yeah.
But that was his lightweight entry into the world of science.
This kid sounds all right.
This kid's name is Taylor Wilson. It may be that you guys have even heard of him. I hadn't, and I don't know why, but I'm so impressed by what he did. So my introduction to this was a National Geographic interview with an author that did a story on Taylor Wilson, and also about how our educational system helps the kids at the lower end, but really kind of neglects the really, really high achievers.
Yeah.
And so it looks like an interesting topic, but I'm particularly interested in Taylor Wilson. After his biodiesel obsession, he got over that much quicker than you did. When his grandmother let him use her garage as a laboratory, by the time he was 11, he was playing with radioactive stuff in her garage, and his and this part isn't funny. His grandmother had cancer, and so she was getting some radiation type treatments, and I think they were also putting some nuclear isotopes into her bloodstream for various purposes, probably for imaging purposes. And so you're free to laugh at the next part, though. He asked his grandmother for some of her pee when she was on some nuclear treatment, so that he could analyze it in his laboratory in her garage, and she obliged him. She also
This is a good grandma. My garage.
My grandma never gave me pee.
Here, have my radioactive pee. This has the makings of a really good superhero story.
Who wants their origin story to be radioactive pee, though?
They call me Yellow Stream. No, Gold Stream.
You're right. Spider-Man got bit by a radioactive spider. Taylor, what's his name? Taylor
Wilson.
Wilson got some radioactive pee. You know what? This doesn't make for a very good superhero story.
So anyways, he got the pee. He played with that with his Geiger counter, and then he also got some of her tumor and part of her lungs, which she coughed up and gave to him, and he dissected. Yeah, he dissected those.
Wow.
Yeah, he admits that it's a little bit weird, but he's okay with that.
Well, how old is he now?
I think he's 24 now. But you're getting ahead of the story. While he was doing this, he got thinking about just how expensive these nuclear treatments were. Because the isotopes that are required to make these treatments are created in multi-million-dollar facilities by these really expensive cyclotrons, and the half-life of the isotopes is very short. So you have to put them on an airplane, fly them to where they're going to be used, and the treatments are just super expensive. So he got thinking, like, why couldn't I can I make it so that they're cheaper, so that even somebody in sub-Saharan Africa could get these kind of treatments if they needed them. And so he said, I'm going to build a fusion reactor. Which I would have thought the same thing probably if I had two brains at my disposal instead of just one.
Well, you weren't playing with radioactive pee. It got his mind, super active.
Goldstream.
So do you know what the story reminds me of so far? Are you guys familiar with the radioactive Boy Scout? I think his last name was Han.
Was that the guy that was like scraping like radioactive stuff out of watches in the woodshed behind his house?
Yeah, and taking apart dozens and dozens and dozens of smoke detectors so that he could get the radioactive isotopes out of them. And he was making a little breeder reactor. He built a breeder reactor in his mother's tool shed while he was a teenager.
Right. This is back in the 60s,
what's a breeder reactor? Sorry.
So you can use this reactor to make other radioactive isotopes, like by focusing a beam of radiation, I guess. And
it's probably neutrons and probably mostly neutrons. I don't know.
So like a box out of lead around it, and then had like a hole, and the hole was the window that he could irradiate things with, and unfortunately I'm a little ignorant. I'm a lot ignorant when it comes to this kind of stuff. But his story was just fascinating. He was a little bit more nefarious, and I don't think he was doing this to help the world like Taylor here. He was doing it as I'm smarter than you all. Let's see what I can get away with kind of a thing. And he actually, when he was a teenager, he got samples of radioactive materials from universities simply by calling them and telling them that he, just lying. Hey, I'm with some random university and I'm working on this project. Can you send me, do you have some spare plutonium that I could have? And just by
best days of radioactivity.
It was the Wild West, and this was in the late 90s and early 2000s. So it's not that long ago. What's that?
It was that recent.
Yeah,
in the 60s. Oh,
no, this was fairly recently. And then he went into the Navy, and he wanted to be in their nuclear submarine program, but he, I think, washed out of the Navy, and he just kept getting into trouble with the law. And I'm not sure whatever happened with him. Can't remember. Anyway, I'll have to do a little bit more reading up on this to find out what happened to our friend, the radioactive Boy Scout. But I don't think that it was a good end. If I'm remembering right, it was a rather tragic end. I don't think he's still with us.
Oh.
And Mr. Hahn, if you are still with us, please comment in the comments below, and we will gladly retract this part of the story. So, sorry, I have taken over your story with one much more nefarious. You're telling like the origin story of like the good guy, and I'm like, ooh, but the bad guy. And Mr. Hahn, if you're listening, I'm sorry that I called you an evil supervillain.
Well, if he's not with us, he could be listening. Maybe your bookcase will start rattling.
Yeah.
So, and you're assuming that the end of my story has Mr. Taylor and as a good guy.
Uh-oh.
Little suspense builder there.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm hooked.
So he decided to make a fusion reactor. Now, for the uninitiated, there are a couple different kinds of reactors. There's a fission reactor. There's a fusion reactor. A fission reactor is where they split apart atoms. A fusion reactor is where you smash atoms together and make them stick together. Our sun is a fusion reactor. Yes.
Did I hear you correctly that he built a fusion reactor, or that was his intention?
Fission.
He built a fusion reactor. Yes, indeed.
Okay, the hook is set. I must. I'll shut up.
Yeah, stop talking.
So you've seen Spider-Man with Doc Ock, where he's got his 8 arms to control the fusion source? It's nothing like that.
Oh, okay.
I mean, but we were talking about Spider-Man already, so...
Speaking of radioactive pee. Radioactive pee.
Radioactive what?
Pee.
Pee. Yes, okay. Or not, speaking of it. Okay. So, anyway, he used, what is it? An electrostatic containment unit, which was invented by a dude called Philo T. Farnsworth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A good Idahoan.
I'm not familiar with the device, but I'm super fascinated that he created a deuterium smasher utilizing this electrostatic containment system.
Oh, okay.
Invented by Philo T. Farnsworth. Do you guys remember who that bloke is?
Yeah. He's the inventor of television.
Right. At least if you ask an American. If you ask a Brit, they'll tell you something different.
Yeah.
And a Russian will tell you something completely different.
Well, it's because, it's being simultaneously developed in multiple different places, and he came up with one of the solutions to drive that. It's kind of like if you were to ask, well, I mean, this is a technology that's still being made, but if you were to ask, well, who's inventing holographic television displays right now, and that answer could be many different people, but I mean, the thing that would be important is, well, who gets it out there to where it's actually being used, I think.
Right. Or who invented the electric car? It was the guys at Tesla. No! Electric cars were around back in 1900.
Yeah, well, didn't the guy that started Mercedes-Benz, didn't he start with electric cars?
I don't remember.
And Mercedes, by the way, that was the name of his wife or girlfriend or something. That wasn't him. Mercedes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway.
All right.
Okay, so
back to our comic book story.
So he built a deuterium smasher with this, and deuterium is hydrogen with an extra neutron, and so it would smash it together. Now, it's not there's somebody in a box behind you. So his fusion reactor is not like the sun, where it generates more electricity or more power than you put into it. He's putting a lot of power in to smash these together, but he's interested in creating these isotopes. And
Right,
as he
right.
was playing with this, he was um, he got thinking that he could use the stream of neutrons coming out of this for other purposes, and he figured out that he could actually create a detector that you could use to solve one of the biggest problems in homeland security, and that is we land around 10,000 shipping containers a day in the United States, and
Oh, yeah.
there was no way to inspect all of those shipping containers for nuclear materials or radioactive materials, or even explosives for that matter. You needed something that could see through these containers and that you could just drive through and inspect. And so he figured out that these neutrons, and I don't know how it works. I only just read about this before we started, that he figured out a way to make these detectors, and it could detect both explosives um, uh, and radioactive materials. The explosives were worked by um, hitting the nitrogen atoms and making them give off gamma rays, and it could detect the gamma rays coming off of it. And so,
Not an imaging technology. It's more of it senses what compounds are
I think
present.
it senses the presence of elements.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I'm not exactly sure how that works yet. I have to look into that in the future. But the guys in the black suits became very interested in that, and so the U.S. government gave him a grant, as I understand it, to work on it. He started a security company to do this.
Fascinating.
But he also made so these detectors are like hundreds of dollars versus hundreds of thousands of dollars for the previous detectors that didn't even have the capabilities that his detectors had,
No,
apparently. Yeah,
awesome.
it's just cool. And he did this by the time he was 14. So
No.
if you don't feel underachieving by now, then you're hiding something from me. So
Uh,
Well, I'm going to go dig through some Philo T. Farnsworth inventions and see what I can come up with, I guess.
right, and do it.
I'm just gonna go saw some more pickups in half and weld them together.
I just putting together 100-year-old farmhouse.
Nice. Well, cool. That he sounds much more like the superhero than the supervillain. So that's cool. I'm glad.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And he's 24 now, and I didn't have time to learn what he did in the last 10 years.
He's
Well, we're gonna have
he's
to
just
do
a little
an
smarter
update
than your average superhero, because most of your superheroes who are supposedly geniuses never actually create inventions that they sell to the world and support themselves. Who knows why? Why doesn't Lex Luthor just, make all his money off of being a successful businessman? You'd think he'd just do that. Instead, he spends all his time trying to be a supervillain.
Well, I mean, true. However, in real life, there are geniuses that their psychology drives them to work on the fringes. I guess they aren't satisfied with being I don't know, with being normal. You know what I'm saying? There are some hackers, some organized criminal types that couldn't see themselves being legit.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. It's all about working on the fringes, going against the man.
Right.
Sticking it to the man.
Just showing that you're smarter than everybody else.
Right.
Hmm.
Right.
Laws are there to break them.
Right. That's why
That's
I
not
got
my
it.
actual philosophy. You remember,
okay.
my philosophy is I don't believe in privacy.
Which you revealed last week.
Oh, yes. There you go.
Very interesting.
There's our shameless plug. Go watch our other videos if you want to get that one.
And if you go watch now, you could double the view count.
Yeah.
Excellent.
You could be the first one.
Right. Well, the third person to watch any of our videos gets a prize. We'll send them a personal message with thumbs ups in it.
Right. You gotta leave a message though.
Okay, so let me know as soon as you post the video so we can all go watch it. That way we don't have to worry about figuring out who the third person was who watched it.
Oh, that's true. We should probably change that to like the fourth person. Well, fifth, because mom will watch it.
Yeah.
Yes.
David's got a klaxon hooked up for the fifth viewer. Hasn't gone off yet.
Right. Oh. So, do you got something exciting, John?
I don't really. I've got some news, but I wouldn't call it exciting. So if you got something, I'd say you go ahead.
Oh, well, all right. So, this story requires a little bit of setup. So we got to go back in time just a little bit. 4.5 billion years.
Oh, it's a birth.
It is a birth. The birth of the Earth. 4.5 billion years. That's what we believe.
Sorry.
Like Dr. Seuss physics lesson here. So, we believe that the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. However, the Earth is very active geologically, and so it's constantly churning the material on the crust, right? It's constantly being, swallowed back up and churned up and
I know what
melted.
the news is. Sorry.
It's kind of like when I do. Yeah. Well, don't let the cat out of the bag that we don't actually report on any news. We just report other people's news.
Sorry.
So
I missed something. I have no idea what just happened there.
Well, I said don't let the cat out of the bag, so I grabbed the closest bag.
Oh, gotcha.
Sorry.
Right.
Edit that out later.
All right. This is completely edited out. So the Earth is very active geologically, and it's constantly rototilling the crust. So the oldest rocks that geologists have found on Earth are about 2 billion years old. That's the oldest that we found. Anything older than that has already been swallowed back up and churned up again, right? So there is a limit to how old the samples are that we can find of Earth rocks. Now, we're going to jump back in time a little less far back in time. We're going back about 50 years to Apollo 14. The Apollo 14 mission. They brought back about 160 kilograms of moon rocks. And that's a lot of rocks. And they have to be stored in very specific conditions. They have to be, we have to be very careful with them to make sure that we don't contaminate them. And the cataloging and the study of these rocks has been going on continuously for the past 50 years. It's still going on.
Huh.
This last week, one of the teams that's been studying these rocks announced that one of the rocks that Apollo 14 brought back is an Earth rock.
What?
Based on its chemistry, that it would be less of a coincidence for it to have been ejected into space from an impact on the Earth and then landed on the moon than for that to have been made on the moon. because the materials that are in it are so rare on the moon and yet in such high concentration in this rock.
Oh, that's cool.
It's much, much, much more likely that it came from Earth. And when they dated the rock, it's 4 billion years old. The oldest Earth rock that we have came from the moon.
Wow. So I mean that I assume that means that the moon must have got sprayed with Earth rocks, because the odds of them picking up 160 kilograms of rocks and one of them happened to be an Earth rock, like it must have just got splattered.
Yeah.
Earth
Yeah.
rock. Like,
yeah.
in the early periods of the Earth then.
Well, so it can't have been too long ago, because over time the moon is, just by all of the impacts that it receives, it has no atmosphere to burn up small asteroids, small meteors and meteorites.
Yeah.
So pretty much everything that points at the moon lands on the moon, and that churns up fine dust, and that slowly builds up on top of any ejected, right? So it can't have been too long. I mean, we're talking geological time frame, so it can't have been too many millions of years ago that this Earth rock landed on the moon. It may have been orbiting, it may have got knocked off of the Earth and floated around out in space for literally billions of years, and then landed on the moon in the last billion years.
Uh-huh.
You know what I'm saying? Because it was on the surface, and the astronauts were able to just scoop it up with all of the other rocks that they picked up.
Right. So I'm just saying that if that was a rare event on the moon for an Earth rock to end up there, that an even rarer event is an astronaut sweeping up a rock on the moon. For those two rare events to coincide would be astronomical.
Right. So this same article that I read also did mention how swapping material amongst the objects in the solar system is not as unheard of as what we would have thought it was, just because of the huge time frames that we're talking about, and just all of the motion that's going on in our solar system. We have a meteorite that's origin was Mars.
Right. It found in Antarctica, right?
I don't know that part, but we do have some scientist somewhere here on Earth has a meteorite that we've determined that it started out on Mars. So this happens, So
how does this happen? Just get blasted by some giant chunk of space rock and then knocks off more debris out into the solar system?
Absolutely. So you get a big enough meteor that crashes into Earth or Mars. I don't know Venus. Venus has a really thick atmosphere. It might make it much more difficult. But anyway, just a really big strike can hit hard enough to launch something with escape velocity. It, you know what I mean? Can make it all the way out of our atmosphere, out into space.
And I guess, considering that each planet has its own gravity well around it, it's going to draw in any of those just loose floating bodies that are out there. A lot of them would get knocked into orbit for a bit, but it'll either get locked into orbit or eventually make its way to one of the bodies that's floating around out there.
Yeah. It makes me wonder if the extinction event meteor for the dinosaurs, if that caused Earth ejecta to fly out and land on the moon. Like,
nice.
If you did an extensive enough search on the moon, could you find Earth rocks preserved from that period?
That would be cool.
I guess we probably
a dinosaur bone
already
from
have
Earth
there. that I wonder if
So
it's different somehow.
are you familiar with the term panspermia? It's
No.
the concept that that life on one planet could have been seeded from another planet.
Oh.
And that was, that's one theory on how, the microscopic life on Earth started was by, a chunk of some planet that had microscopic life on it got knocked into space, and some microbes are hardy enough that they can survive the vacuum of space. They go into they dehydrate and just go into a suspended animation. That term is kind of worn out, but they hibernate, and they can last for a long time, for centuries. We've found bacteria that's inside of rocks, that's been in there for thousands of years, that revives as soon as like the air and water gets to it. And we've proven that there are some bacteria, some microscopic organisms that are hardy enough to survive in space, and
some of those grow into face huggers.
Yeah, I was gonna say, sounds like we're getting back to comic books here.
Well, yeah. So yeah. So there's talk. There's always discussion about whether it's possible for Earth to seed Mars, and it is possible, but Mars is so inhospitable that even if a bacteria-laden rock landed on Mars, from Earth to Mars, it would have to be really, really, really lucky to land in a place like maybe along the equator. Or, it's so cold, it's so dry that it would most certainly just die there, or just stay hibernating there.
On that note, scientists have found briny areas on Mars with very salty water that they believe, that they've demonstrated that could be hospitable to life. They've found similar conditions on Earth, where I don't remember where. Just like these super briny, salty, water concentrations that could be hospitable to certain forms of bacterial life.
Yeah. We think of life requiring, liquid water and sunlight, but not all life requires sunlight. Not all of the energy for life requires sunlight. The vast, vast, vast majority of life on Earth does, but there are some life forms that get all of their energy from geothermal sources, so or even chemical sources. So, like you said, a briny pool of liquid water. You've got the liquid water part, and then if you have the right mix of chemicals, some life could derive energy from the chemicals therein, or the heat from a geothermal well. But Mars is much less hospitable, and the area that is its potential for supporting life is much smaller. This lake that they found is subterranean. It's underneath a big, huge ice cap, and it's oh boy, what was the size they said it was? I can't remember. I read about the same thing, Elroy, and it's not a really huge lake, so the likelihood of it being teeming with life is probably low.
Right.
But what a cool idea. And there's also some. Oh, you gotta be quiet, buddy. There is some little bit of back and forth. Some scientists don't see a problem with just seeding life willy-nilly all over the solar system. You know, like what is it? Is it the moon of Jupiter that has the subterranean ocean?
Right.
Not
I think that's Europa, right?
Europa. Is it? I can't remember.
I think
Anyway,
so.
some people were saying, let's go, let's send a probe there and let's drill and let's get a sample of this water. And other people are like, no way, because it's almost impossible for us to completely sterilize any spacecraft. We would most certainly contaminate the water supply with more than zero Earth microbes. And
Right.
they say that, you know, that's not an ethical thing to do.
Right.
And I'm kind of the opinion of, you know, like, drill baby drill. Let's go send these bacteria all over. Let's go cough all over the solar system.
Drop off a few fish while you're there.
And then you can build a resort. Go ice fishing.
Come back a few thousand years later, maybe 100,000 years or so, and just have all sorts of fun. Sorry,
Right?
what was that?
Ice fishing for trillionaires.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not convinced yet that we have an ethical obligation to not go spreading our Earth life all over the place. But when I put it like that, it sounds like I'm just like some disgusting disease-laden Nurgle running around like coughing phlegm all over the whole solar system. So you put it that way, I kind of see the point. That's all I got.
All right, Jonathan.
All right.
Us.
As I said, I have news. I don't know that it's necessarily very exciting. It's just that Microsoft is.
You can't sell it like that. You.
Oh, sorry.
Do your old-timey announcer
amazing
voice.
Thing ever.
It's super exciting.
Yeah.
Oh, way exciting.
You know that voice?
What's that?
What?
The old-timey announcer voice.
Well, let's see here. No, not that voice. They got me thinking of some old British fellow. But no, Microsoft has come up with they wouldn't be called tools. What would you call them? Just some VR experiences that they're apparently going to be giving out to their Windows mixed reality users, which is me. That are going to be educational in purpose. So they're going to have some virtual field trips, virtual classes and stuff like that. All right, what was that?
They have as many users as we have viewers?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I was slow, but I got there.
Well, I was slow because you were like the next paragraph before I came up with that snappy quip.
All right. Back to business. Yes.
Right.
So yeah, they're going to be putting out some educational tools that'll apparently be available for Windows mixed reality users. So I was hoping on getting in there and just seeing what it's like, see if it's useful at all before today, but I didn't get that opportunity. So I plan on coming next week and talking about what that experience is like, taking a look at what they have, getting my kids in there and seeing what they think. I'm really interested in that kind of thing, because I told you before about how when my kids went from playing Wind Waker on a flat screen and trying to play it there and go from one platform to the next, they really struggled trying to get through that. And then when I put it on my computer and have them get into VR and try it, all of a sudden this platforming section that they had really struggled to do, my son Jacob had gone through and he had gone through once, got about halfway and fell off a platform. And so I stepped away. I'm like, okay, he just needs time to try it. I came back and he had finished. And so I think there's some real power in VR and just making somebody be there, understand spatially what's going on. And I'm curious to see the potential with education, see where that goes. So I'll be taking a look at that and reporting on that.
So now that you've had a couple of years playing around with some kind of nascent virtual reality technologies and thinking about it a lot as you peer into the future with your all-seeing eye.
Yeah.
What do you think is don't do that. what what do you think the impact of virtual reality is likely to be, if you had to make a guess?
I think that is a loaded question. There's a lot to unpack there.
Absolutely.
But let's
I was
see.
just gonna grab some snacks and
Yeah.
watch you squirm.
Well, I think that virtual reality still has potential to really make an impact in a lot of areas. But the problem is that in spite in spite of the fact that it's gone leaps and bounds as it has over the last few years, there are some major hurdles that it needs to overcome. And one of those is that there's this whole chicken and egg scenario that you have happening. Is that in order to get really good content for VR, you need to have lots of VR users.
Mm.
But in order to get lots of VR users, you need compelling content. And so there's this kind of right now we're not seeing anything that's really compelling that people are like, this is the killer app of VR. I'm going to get VR because of this experience. There are a lot of really cool concepts, some things that you can go and try out that last for like 20 minutes or so.
Uh-huh.
And that there are getting to be more and more like AAA experiences when you're talking about games. But when it comes to just having mass appeal for everyone, there's nothing out there yet to make that happen.
Uh-huh.
And
There- there-
so,
There's not some app or I guess experience. It can't just be an app. It has to be a total experience that has yet gotten to the point where everybody's got to try it, or feel like they're missing out on something big.
yeah. Yep.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
so I listened to a radio show this week about the next generation of spacesuits, and that JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, is developing, and one of the advances that they are trying to integrate into them is using augmented reality. Because the Apollo astronauts, one thing that they noted was it was really difficult for them to maneuver around, not just because of the limited mobility. That was a huge part of it. But one thing that they found very difficult to overcome was just the contrast and just the quality of the light on the moon is so much different than what our bodies were designed for. You know, because it was getting just pure sunlight and then black shadows.
Oh,
And
oh
so
yeah.
the navigating the topography was really difficult for them. Anything that was in a shadow was just blacked out. Anything that was in the sunlight was almost washed out. So JPL is working on augmented reality inside the helmet that will, I guess, represent the topography for them if they go to Mars or the moon again. So to kind of help them out with these weird situations that our bodies weren't designed to handle. Our eyes weren't designed.
You bring up a good point, is that with both augmented reality and virtual reality, you have things in very specific areas where virtual reality is not only helpful, but almost essential. And it saves so much money that that's what they do, or that's a possible tool that they can use. And so you have a lot of these industries that they use it for training purposes when the actual training would just be too dangerous, or if it's too expensive to build a house. Sorry, go ahead.
I took some welding classes a couple of years ago that my work paid for, and Miller Welders has a setup that's virtual reality welding. So you hold an actual MIG Stinger. It feels just like a real thing. It's got the button and everything, but you put on some VR goggles, and you're inside of a structure, like a construction site, and you can go and you can weld on the structure. And it's kind of it's kind of unnerving because when you're looking around, you don't have any legs. You're just like a pair of hands there, or not even a pair, just a single hand holding onto a welding stinger. So that's a little unnerving, but it's kind of cool. It's neat. Like you can kind of get the feel for doing different welding on different positions, which in real life, it costs money. You have to pay for gas for the welder. You have to pay for electricity. You have to pay for the materials, the metal. You have to pay for the safety equipment. And then you have to not burn yourself or electrocute yourself, or, all kinds of things that, present a barrier to entry. Whereas this thing, you can get somebody that's never welded in their life and throw them in there, and they can learn, oh, if I'm welding with this rod in this angle, I'm going to get sparks dropping on me, so don't do that. Whereas in real life, you can't, when you learn that is when you have actual blobs of molten metal landing down inside your open boot. So
you learn fast that way, though.
You do, yeah. You usually don't do that twice.
I was teaching Lewis how to solder copper pipes together, and molten solder dripped on him. And, he learned, and so he's never soldered again.
Well, he learned.
Sometimes it works that way.
Oh, right up.
So going back to VR, that's a perfect example. And there are plenty of other examples that you can give of industries that use VR for training or other purposes like that, because it's a lot less expensive and it's a lot safer to do it in a virtual environment. But I mentioned the content versus viewers problem that we run into. Yeah. Well, then there are a few other problems as well. One is that setup still continues to be a pain in the neck. Even with stuff like Windows Mixed Reality, which has a limited setup, you just plug it into your computer, and then you're able to get going from there once you set up a perimeter. But I've found that with lighting conditions, it can affect the way that it perceives your perimeter so much that every time I start, I almost have to set up the perimeter anyway each time. And so I know that when I get into VR, it's going to take me 15 minutes at the very least to get it up and running.
You can't just on a whim just say, hey, I'm going to go and play around with it and plop it on and you're there.
Right.
So your casual user that's going to grow old pretty fast.
It does.
Play, you got to do that.
And so these solutions that Oculus is putting out, and I believe that HTC has a solution as well, but it's been a while since I've looked at that, but where you have a standalone set that allows you to not only, have rotational detection so that you can look in any direction, but motion detection as well, so you can move your head around, where all you have to do is slip it on and you're ready to go. Those kinds of things I think are really appealing. But then you run into the issue of you have to limit your experiences on that because you're running on a mobile architecture, and they can't do the kinds of things that you can do on a PC machine. So we're at a point where there's so many sacrifices that have to be made or compromises that have to be made that it's hard to feel like we're going to get to a point where mass adoption is going to take place, unless out of the blue, somebody creates something that's so compelling that people are like, yeah, it's worth it to go through the trouble to get it set up.
So, John, how long would it take for our hardware to catch up that we could just muscle through these problems with sheer computing power? You know, if let's assume Moore's law stays in effect.
Yeah, that's assuming
would it
Moore's
take
law
10
stays
years?
into effect.
10 years?
I couldn't tell you exactly. I don't know how long it would take for a mobile architecture to catch up to what our high-end gaming PCs are doing now.
Got it.
Well, I mean, already Magic Leap has got a belt-worn computer and a mobile architecture, not a mobile phone architecture, but an architecture that you're supposed to be able to walk around in the world, and it's supposed to register the room around you as you're walking through it.
I think those belt-worn solutions, I think that's a genius idea because you can add more weight to it, offset the weight from the headset, put it down on the belt. Because the problem is you get too much weight on the headset and you start dealing with neck strain. So I love that solution from Magic Leap, and I don't understand why more people don't go with that, more companies. Actually, I do understand. And it comes down to if you can get it in one little packet where all you're doing is slipping something on your head to your users, that's something that's compelling. Every little additional thing you add to it, it becomes cumbersome. Kind of why people loved, well, I guess there's still a lot of people who love Macs versus PCs, because it used to be that in a PC, you'd sit down, you'd have to plug in all these things to it, whereas a Mac, you just sit it down and the whole thing's in one. And a lot of people loved that, the convenience of just having one machine that would do whatever they wanted.
Man, that's going back.
Yeah, I know.
That's 20 years, Jonathan. The IMAX.
Yeah.
Huh, okay. That's
I don't know if
interesting.
I answered your question.
No,
but
you artfully dodged. You had bloviated to.
No. I've got more. I could go on, but I don't want to eat up all our time on just blustering, waffling, as they say.
Well, I think we've probably come to the end of what our diehard fans can stand. Mom will have fallen
Thank you,
asleep by
Mom.
now.
Yep. Good night, Mom.
Glad to put you to sleep.
Well, if nothing else, we're really good at doing that.
Yeah, put us on when you go to bed at night. We'll put you to sleep. Thank you.
You might
This
have
has been
strange
Breaks
dreams.
Optional.
John, you sound like you're selling diamonds on the corner of State and let's see, what's that? Anyway, you remember that, Elroy? Have you been gone from Utah for too long?
I don't think I know what the reference is there.
So there's a local diamond wholesaler, well, not wholesaler, local diamond seller that has these radio commercials constantly that sounds like Squidward is the announcer. You know, now you have a friend in the diamond business. SpongeBob.
Oh, it's all coming back. It's
Yeah.
coming back. I remember this now.
SpongeBob, be quiet. I'm trying to practice my clarinet. There you go. That's my SpongeBob / Tom Shane. And Shane Company, if you guys want to sponsor us, please send us a private message and we'll work something out.
And a suitcase of diamonds.
Diamonds. Right. All right. Well, thank you, both of our viewers, for sticking around till the end. We appreciate it.
Indeed.
And we, in this episode, let's recap. We talked about the birth
Superheroes.
of a superhero and a supervillain on either ends of the spectrum. We talked about an Earth rock from the moon on the Earth.
From 30 years ago, from 4 billion years ago.
Yeah, a 50-year-old a rock that was collected 50 years ago from 4 billion years from the moon, from the Earth. We talked about sneezing all over the solar system, and we talked about waffling in VR.
That seems accurate.
Yes.
All right. Well, we've
As
run out.
Clicky Clack used to say, you've wasted another perfectly good hour.
Yep. Remember that there are no refunds when you get to the end of your life. Don't shake your fist and say "breaks optional" because you're not getting it back.
Wait a minute, I think that's our new intro section.
You're not getting it back. No refunds at the end of your life.
Breaks optional. You're not getting it back.
Yeah. All right. Well.
Good night.
Bye.
Adieu.
All right.